I'm happy to be here, and I'm grateful to the Bloom Festival for having me. I was here before, but not last year, and to Edmonton before, and here we go again. So thank you. Here's a question to start our conversation for tonight, and the question is there anything in this life that can make you happy besides you? Tough question to answer, and for some people you know the answer right away, and you don't have to answer, but it's something to think about. Like, who gives you the authority to be happy in your life or to be a leader in your life? Who does? You do. That's the bottom line. Especially now we live in this realm where you go to like a yoga teacher training with this old school model of you jump through all the hoops, and then at the end they give you a piece of paper that says you're a teacher. You know what will define you as a teacher? Not a piece of paper. Your commitment. That's it. How committed you are. And your own consciousness, in my opinion, is the most valuable resource in the world. If you're disconnected from your own consciousness, do you know who you are? It's a hard way to live, not knowing who you are. I don't know about you, but I've had times in my life where I don't know who I am. And in those times, I experience a lot of resistance. And that resistance is a teacher that's guiding me to see who I am in relationship to my conditions. You know, conditions, circumstances, or we call them karmas. If you don't know who you are in relationship to your conditions, and that goes on for long enough, it becomes neuroses. And if that goes on for long enough, it can become depression. And depression is when you can't see a way out of your conditions. Your conditions start to define you. But if you know who you are in relationship to your conditions, and we'll get to this who are you business, that's what this is about. But if you know who you are in relationship to your conditions, then you're free. But does that mean that you won't face pain and suffering? No. You have to face pain and suffering. It's part of nature. You know, the Buddha, his big awakening is that life is what? Suffering. Yeah. And what causes suffering? Craving. You know what craving is? You want something outside of yourself. And that begins to define you. It's the same thing I'm saying, but in different words. So the idea is, if you start to recognize who you are in relationship to your conditions, you can manage suffering and the great blessings of life, because you face all of them. You know? And to think that you won't have any stress or pain in life is absurd, because you need stress. Nature relies on stress to exist. Ask anybody who's given birth to a child. Did it take some stress to give birth to a child? Yeah. Not like in a cartoon when the stork drops the baby in through the chimney and into the crib and everybody's happy. It requires stress. And every so often in life you meet somebody who's like quite a bit older, and they've been doing practice for a long time, and they appear to be ageless. How do they do that? They get to decide how much stress passes through the system. Does it mean that they haven't had any stress? No, they just know their relationship to stress. You see what I mean? Like, to pray that you won't have any stress, you just end up letting yourself down with that one, because you've got to have stress. But if you allow yourself to be defined by stress, that becomes neuroses, and then eventually will become depression. See sort of where I'm going with this? So consciousness then is the most valuable commodity there is, and it should never be compromised. So this who are you conversation, your identity, we're saying choose your identity over your conditions. Or in other language, choose your dharma over your karma. Right? So who you are is, think about this. What is the value of a child at birth? You can't name it. Why? Because it's infinite. You don't go by the little baby cribs if you go in the hospital where the babies are born and they all have price tags hanging off the toes. Every child is born with infinite worth. And then what happens? The karmas start to define the value of the child. Maybe the parents aren't able to love the child effectively. Maybe they're born into some conditions that cause them to lose sight of the infinite worth. Some children recognize the infinite worth all the way until they're teenagers. Some lose sight of it right from the beginning because of their conditions. But does that mean that their infinite worth goes away because of their conditions? No. It's always there. This Udasi yogi named Guru Nanak, who this lineage comes down through, he said, Ad such, jugad such, habi such, nanak ahosi be such. It means you were born with infinite worth. You have infinite worth your whole life, regardless of your karmas. You have infinite worth even now, and you will always have infinite worth. But it's up to you whether you acknowledge that as you pass through your conditions. It's up to you. Because we said, who gives you the authority to step into the role of the master? You do. Right? By seeing who you are in relationship to your conditions. And in order for you to be conscious, you have to be aware of this. And to be aware of this, you have to develop intuition. That's another buzzword. It's a good time to be alive when these are buzzwords. And to have intuition, what do you have to do? This whole building is built around it. Meditation. I think. I mean, I've never been here before. It's called lifestyle meditation. One would assume that's what the building is built around. To meditate. And in order to get deeper into the experience of meditation, who do you have to be? You. It's a simple, kind of a tricky question. But the real you. And meditation over time, if you tell somebody, I teach meditation for a living, what's the first thing they say? I can't meditate. And then what do they say? Because my mind is too busy. They always say that. And the funny thing about it is that, guess what? Everybody's mind is too busy. The difference between a meditator's mind and a non-meditator's mind, they're having the same experience of the karmas. The only difference with a meditator is they are able to turn the alarm off. And if you don't have a meditation practice, you can't turn the alarm off. It consumes you. You become defined by what? Your conditions. You're going to hear that word a ton. Conditions. All right? Conditions. You know what I mean by conditions? It's a lot of things. Physical conditions, things in your life, conditions, your parents' conditions, your culture you live in's conditions. These are all conditions that are created from action being repeated over and over and over and over and over. And if you don't know who you are, you become defined by that. Right? Doesn't mean you don't have conditions when you know who you are. You do have them. It's like we say, I am happy. Who's happy? You are. So that means that you possess happiness. Well, who's the you? That's the question. Right? Or you ask somebody who's depressed, are you fully depressed? Yes. Is every part of you depressed? Yes. How do you know you're depressed? Well, I notice I'm depressed. Well, is the noticer depressed? And all of a sudden things start to get a little strange, because it's like, well, I don't know if the noticer is depressed. The noticer is noticing I'm depressed. Aha, we've got something going on here. Your identity is experiencing depression. It's not your identity. And if you're really deep in it, it's hard to see that there's any way out of that, or that the condition will change. But conditions always change, because they're a part of nature. And what is the quality of nature that makes it nature? It always changes. You can't pray that it will just be autumn forever, or that winter will never come, or that it would just be daytime all the time, or that your body would say, stay 20 forever. I mean, it's not possible. Those are your conditions. Do your emotions stay the same? No. So we know they're part of nature. Do your thoughts stay the same? No. So we know they're part of nature. Does your personality stay the same? This is when it gets tricky. No. But somehow, some portion of it is there as you pass through all the conditions. You didn't forget who you were when you were 10, or 20, or 30, or 40. Right? Some portion of it remains. And then the other part is shifting and changing. And in yoga, they call it Purusha and Prakriti. Purusha is the creator. And it's not something outside of you. That's an old way of thinking. It's you. And if you want to be one with the Creator, what's a good practice? Creativity. Have you ever had a time in your life when you're not creating anything? You just had some job, going through the motions. You don't really like it that much. You just got to get a paycheck. How do you feel? Dull. And then, have you ever had a time in your life where you're really creative, doing something you love, you just love getting up every day? It doesn't have to be painting a picture. Creativity's got a funny thing about, or it has to be a performance where you get a round of applause at the end. We're not talking about that. It could be that. But just means you're making stuff every day in your life, creating. How do you feel? Radiant, like yourself. You're one with the Creator. Whether you want to call it God, or there's all these hang-ups around belief systems with that word. So just think of it as you. And then Prakriti is nature. Or what's the word that goes with Creator? Creation. And the Creator is meant to command creation. It's in the old books about this. Western books, Eastern books. But if the creation starts to command the Creator, what happens? Resistance. And the resistance is there to make the Creator know who's in charge. The Creator is. I've had a lot of resistance in my life, you know. I got to get the lesson like 30 times before I get it. You know what comes from that? Compassion. Which is a good thing. You know, but these are the terms that they used in yoga to explain this process. And the Prakriti is always shifting and changing and becoming something else, and has a dark side and a light side. And then consciousness is just always there. It doesn't change. But whether you notice it or not depends. You know what the word yoga means? Shout it out if you've heard some ideas. Union of what? Body, mind, and soul. Good. What else? Yog, the word yog, when you read about it in the old books, they call it oneness with God. Now I'm going to challenge this and say that God is the best version of you. Not something outside of you. They say that God is infinite in the old books. Where's infinite? Where is it? Everywhere. It's not over there and I'm over here. That's finite. How could it be over there and I'm over here? It's everywhere. Or in Buddhism, the same word for mind is the same word for space. Everywhere. So yoga means oneness with God. And despite the institutions or organized religions that have convinced us for generations that it's something outside of you, it's not. It's you. Some people don't like that, but just got to share what I've experienced. You know. And it's the fully creative version of you, and it's the radiant version of you, and it's the luminescent version of you. And the beautiful thing about the resistance that I'm saying, when nature tries to define you and you let it happen, that means that resistance as teacher means even your perceived missteps are leading you to you. That's been my experience. I've made a lot of mistakes. Now that I have some understanding of who I am when I make a mistake, you know what I do right away? Starts with an F. Forgive myself. Because if I carry it and I carry it and I carry it and I carry it, it creates more and more and more resistance, and eventually I get the same lesson in the end. I just chose to suffer more. It's up to you. You decide, right? As long as you know who you are. We all agreed that when a child is born, it's born with infinite value. So why do you discount yourself? Right? You know, we go along, pop ourselves in the sale bin mentally. It's absurd. But you hear the mental bullshit, right? My teacher, Guru Singh, he's always saying, BS stands for two things. One is belief system, the other is bullshit. It's the same thing. I'd like to ruffle some feathers. But God is the best version of you. The one that shines like the sun, lighting up the lives of everybody equally. And we get to thinking that, you know, we understand that we have this infinite value and we're one with the Creator, and then like a lampshade, there's not a lamp here, but people still believe they're the lampshade. You understand? Like some people got a white lampshade and a black lampshade and a gay lampshade and a straight lampshade and a transgendered lampshade and all these lampshades. And you should celebrate your lampshade because it's your lampshade, but it's not the light inside the lampshade. And if you take the lampshade away, what's left? There's only one. That's yoga. There's only one. Oneness with God, the infinite, everywhere at once. But still we're in this process of comparing lampshades. Or my teacher says, how many people here came to this meditation in a blue car? Raise your hand. Does it matter? It's a good teaching. You all got here. Just because she had a blue car doesn't mean that she's better or worse, or, you know, you start to see these things. But we get caught up in the identifying with the conditions. You're not the conditions. And you'll get the lesson. You got 84,000 chances. And the yogis even say you have 84 million incarnations to become a human. That's a lot of chances. You know? So that just says, be kind to yourself as you take your missteps. Or Ram Dass, he says, we're all just walking each other home. It's a nice way of saying it. So hopefully you're nice to your neighbors who you're walking home. You know the word prosperity? You heard it, right? What does it mean? Wealth, a lot of people think of it as wealth, right? Abundance, yeah, good. Huh?
To thrive.
To thrive, beautiful. If you break the word down, what does pro mean? In favor of, right? And sperity comes from the word spiritu. What other word do we get from spiritu? Spirit. Prosperity, the word, actually means in favor of spirit. A good way to explain this is to use the word security. There are a lot of people who on paper seem like they are very wealthy. You know, they got cars and a house and a this and a that and a vacation here and all the things. And they're insecure. Right? And there are other people who have all that on paper and are secure. And there are other people who don't have any of those things and are secure. And there are people who don't have any of those things and are insecure. You sort of see it from another angle of know who you are in relationship to your conditions. It doesn't mean don't have any things, because you're householders. Put up your hand if you took vows as a monk or a nun as a spiritual tradition. Nobody, so you're householders, right? You need to, like, I can't pay to send my daughter to school and feed her with chanting. I'll just pay with this mantra if you don't mind. Right? Or if I just sit home and do sadhana all day, eventually they'll come and take all my stuff and, you know. So you're householders. So you have a responsibility to do your duty and express yourself and make your home beautiful and do all of these things, but with an understanding of who you are in relationship to your conditions. Because we said you're going to pass through challenges. And if you don't know who you are as you go through them, it's going to create more karmas. And if it creates more karmas, it will create more suffering. Not only just for you, but for everybody. Because you are not lampshades, you're the one light. Have you ever experienced pain before? Put your hand up. Everybody, if you didn't put your hand up, you're lazy or lying. So we know that pain is our pain. It's not exclusive to one person, you know. These are some of the great teachings that the Buddha passed down. That if you hurt another, you hurt yourself. And if you heal yourself, you heal everybody. That's why we're still talking about him today. He hasn't lived in a body in a long time, but his legacy continues to live on. And our teacher, Yogi Bhajan, in this lineage, he said, I only have one fear. It's that I'll be here on planet Earth and have never existed. Do you know what he means by that? It means you pass your legacy down. By living as the best version of yourself, the legacy will come through you. And if you kind of just hum along at some getting by status quo kind of mentality, which you know you're not because you were born with infinite worth, then you spend one of your 84,000 lifetimes not existing. Have you heard of this yogi, Shivananda? He wrote 200 books about yoga, and he says the same thing in a different way over and over until finally you're like, I get it, and you don't have to read it anymore. You're like, enough already. But it's good, because the mind plays all these tricks to tell you that you're not the infinite value you were born with. But you know it's true when you break it down, so why do you believe in that? It's pretty convincing. I heard a story about a guy who's sober 25 years, and he said, after 25 years, on a hot sunny day, my mind still says, we could go for a beer right about now. 25 years! Still, it's pretty heavy-duty stuff. Not the drinking, the mind I'm talking about. The drinking, that's another thing. So you want to live a life of prosperity in favor of you. That's it. Tom Petty just passed away. And he has this great quote. I'll have to paraphrase because I don't know it exactly. But it's something to the effect of, find something that you like and do it, and hopefully you get paid for it. That to me is success, he said. It's a good teaching from a great master. He wrote a lot of good songs. And he knew who he was in relationship to all of it. I love being in the presence of somebody who knows who they are. It's the best. You can take them anywhere, to any conditions. 5-star restaurant, worst bar in town, anywhere, and they're just themselves. And this has been an ongoing question about spirituality for a long time. The author Fyodor Dostoevsky wrote a book called The Idiot. And in it, he's asking, is this person simple and dumb, or are they awakened? Because they're just kind of like Dory from the Finding Nemo. And then they made a modernized version of the book. Do you know what it is? Forrest Gump. Same thing. Is Forrest Gump an idiot, or is he awakened? That's the question of the movie. Because you just know who you are in relationship to the conditions. And it seems weird to people, like, shouldn't you be stressed out, or like, identifying more as something? It's like, I'm just me. What am I supposed to identify as? Well, you're supposed to be somebody. It's called somebody training. We do that in society. I'll pretend I'm somebody, and you pretend you're somebody, and we'll all just try and figure it out, Eventually you realize who you are. And then you just be that. It's like when you have kids, that's what you tell them. Just be you. You hear all the things that go on in your head. Oh, well, if you had more money, people would like you. Imagine if you told your kid that at school. If you had more toys, the kids would like you better. So good luck out there. And you send them to school. Or if you were skinnier, you'd have more friends. So have a good day at school. You wouldn't say that. And the child is closer to the infinite worth. And you experience that as a parent, so you don't say that shit. Right? But then when it comes to you, it's like, oh, well, I'm so far beyond, past my infinite worth time. Screw that. And if you do talk to your kids like that, whoa, that's crazy. And the sage Patanjali, he talked about yoga. He said, Yoga chitta vritti nirodha means that yoga is the end of the fluctuations of the mind. You know what that means? It means the end of the thoughts that take you away from you. Yoga means oneness with God, the best version of you. So yoga, he's saying, is the end of that negative self-talk. It's a return to your natural state. You talk to yogis in different traditions, they'll tell you that yoga is a returning to something. It's not something new. Right? Freedom from the shit talker in your head. I should write my own Yoga Sutras translation. Second sutra, yoga is freedom from the shit talker in your head. Tiaga Prem. Copyright. Yeah, maybe. I don't know. You have to market it like... This has been going on, The Legend of Bagger Vance. Did you hear of that movie? It's a golf movie. Robert Redford directed it. Will Smith was in it. Matt Damon. And in the movie, it's about this caddy who's like kind of a mystical character, played by Will Smith. And this golfer who's like kind of down and out, and he's not doing his duty of like showing up and being the best golfer. Does this sound familiar? It's the Bhagavad Gita. That's why it's called Beggar Vance. In the story, Bhagavad Gita, the warrior's name is Arjuna. In the movie, the golfer's name is R. Juna. It's cool. You just have to repackage it so people get the essence of the teaching. Learn to speak. That's what a master does. You don't try and sell it to somebody in a way they don't understand. It creates resistance. Find some way, like a child. You tell, And you see a lot of this going on in the world today. There's some people who are very awake to what's going on, and some people are not very awake to what's going on. And the person who's very awake is not better than the person who's not very awake. It's like the difference between a college student and a first grader. Is a college student better than a first grader? It's absurd. Like, you can't say that. And actually, the college student is really not doing a great job if they can't explain something to a first grader. Like, imagine a college student saying to a first grader, "You idiot, you'll never get this." If you're more awake, you have a responsibility to explain it in a way that makes sense. And in order to do that, you're going to need a meditation practice because you have to be very patient. I have a 5-year-old who I love, but it requires a lot of patience sometimes. It's like, yes, you've been saying the same thing for like 500 times. Look over there, and then she forgets, I don't say, "Will you shut up?" I have to be creative if I want any peace of mind. And every so often you lose it. And then what do you have to do? Ask for forgiveness? Sorry, I was wrong, It's an interesting analogy for the times that we live in anyways. So the big thing that I'm trying to get at with the conditions here, now that you're getting some understanding of what I'm trying to convey, is intuition is the ability to look beneath the surface. Like, you think things are a certain way, the logical mind perceives them to be a certain way, but they're not. Like when somebody's behaving poorly, you start to notice that that's not them. It's pain that's causing them to respond like that. It's their conditions. So then you see the conditions and the person. You see that even the worst person, everybody included, underneath this thick layer of conditions, like a thicker lampshade, is the light. And here's a radical spiritual thought. There isn't anything going on the planet Earth right now that is beyond forgiveness. That's what the Buddha would teach. The only thing now is that in the Buddha's day there was far less people. And in this age, what we call the Aquarian age, we're going to need more than a one and only, like the way religion sells it, the one and only. We need 25 million Buddhas to create a tipping point so that the college students are in charge. Or even better, the college students become the teachers. Not waiting for the one and only. You have the capacity to do it. You were born with infinite worth. But you have to initiate yourself. You can't do any more sort of like, well, maybe someday. Look around you. You think someday is a good time to wait for? Shit is crazy. People are walking around believing they're the lampshade, identifying with their issues, and they have no way of undoing the conditioning. So it's just getting piled on through generations and through pressure and stress and iPhone and, all of these are great tools that we have. Yogi Bhajan, he said, in this time where we are in the 80s, he said, you'll have a screen on the wall that's this thin. You'll be able to watch thousands of movies with a push of a button. Any question that you have, you'll just click a button and something will tell you the answer. Just wait. He said it'll be amazing, but the only problem with it is that it will push all your buttons. And you'll need some way of managing it because it will be too much information for the system to handle. And it's a great gift. It's a neutral thing. It's not bad or good. But you have to do something so you stay connected to who you are, your consciousness in relationship to all of this. Otherwise, what happens? The conditions are trying to define the creator, which creates resistance. And look around. Is there resistance coming as teacher? Yes. And the way that a polarity planet or the duality that we live in, the way that it functions is that for every challenge there's a solution. But in order to see the challenge and the solution at the same time, you have to develop the meditative mind. Otherwise, you start only noticing the challenge. Or some people only notice the solution, like they pretend. It's called privilege. You pretend that there isn't a problem because it doesn't affect you. That's only seeing the solution. We call it privilege. Turn on the news. You'll hear people talking about that. It's the inability to see the challenge and the solution at the same time. That's the Buddha mind. Don't we live in a culture that is afraid of pain and addicted to pleasure? It's the same thing. It's like these extreme polarities. And what would the Buddha say would be the middle path there? To acknowledge the pain and to acknowledge the pleasure. Not to go, I don't ever want to feel pain, so I'm just going to do everything I can to make sure that I feel pleasure all of the time. Because the resistance is going to push you back to the center. And spiritual practice is to catch the teaching at the whisper before it gets to screaming. And this is in the Bhagavad Gita as well. Krishna is telling Arjuna that he has to fight. It's his duty, his destiny. And he doesn't want to do it. And it starts as a whisper. You really should do this. Yeah, I don't think I'm going to do it. Excuse me. You really should do this. Nah, I don't think so. You really should do this. It's like it's happened to you in your life. And then in the end, he gets so fed up with it that he turns himself into this really scary demon-like creature and screams, do it now. And what does he do? He does it. This happens in addiction. People say, what caused you to turn your life around? I hit rock bottom. Krishna screamed at me. It's all symbolism. So our goal or our duty as humans is to learn to see the challenge and the solution at the same time. To recognize that you have a negative mind and a positive mind and you need both. What does the negative mind do? Protects you. If you don't have a negative mind, you're going to be in trouble all the time. You didn't see the danger. But if your negative mind is dominant, you're only seeing the challenge all the time, where do you see danger? Everywhere. Right? What about the positive mind? We need a positive mind. It helps us deal with the negative mind when it's acting up. But what if the positive mind becomes dominant and we only see the solution? It's like we said, you don't see the danger. Or you say yes to everything. Oh yeah, I'll do that. Things you don't want to do. Do you ever know somebody, maybe you're the somebody who says yes to everything? Two things happen. You either get it done or you're exhausted. You get it done and you're exhausted. Or you say yes to everything and how much gets done? Nothing. Right? So you need both. And then you develop a practice of meditation the neutral mind takes input from the two. Oh, this is a dangerous situation. Oh, maybe we should act this way, and then you respond. The Buddha called it skillful means. Right? It's the ability to see the whole thing. Okay, let's do this. Oh, we shouldn't do that because, we should say yes to this because, Then you can navigate your purpose from your identity instead of from your condition. My partner, she is more prone to the negative mind, and I'm more prone to the positive mind. So we work well together. She's like, you can't say yes to everything. And I'm like, you don't have to be, we won't say anything more because she'll be here. But and we all have we're more naturally inclined to one or the other because you're sort of born with the dualistic mind. That's how the mind works in two dimensions: good, bad, right, wrong. I like this, I don't like that. The danger with that is if you don't develop any meditative mind, then what happens is somebody's got to be right and somebody's got to be wrong, and you just walk around like that. I was dropping my friend at the airport today, and the bumper of the car I was driving was 2 feet into the crosswalk, and he walked by and he said, you're parked in the crosswalk. He had to walk 1 foot around to get by the car. And I said, oh, sorry about that. And he kept walking. My friend looked at me, I looked at him, and I said, he just needs a hobby. This is his condition. It doesn't matter. But if I believed in this two-dimensional good, bad, right, wrong, I could have been like, oh yeah, well, what's the big deal? And then we could have just had it out there for no reason. You see those moments, they come all the time. And the meditative mind goes oh, didn't take the bait this time. Sorry about that, sir. And inside you're just going he needs a hobby. And that's fine. Who knows why people do what they do? You start carrying yourself like that because you see the condition. It's not him. He's not a bad person. He wasn't born in the discount bin of the infinite worth at the beginning of his life. Some condition caused him to. And then you see, as you start to understand this, what comes out? Compassion. Right? Isn't that what we need during these times? The Yogi Ji said, understand with compassion or you'll misunderstand the times. It's a key example of that. They had an incident in Vancouver a couple weeks ago where somebody didn't let another person merge, and then they ended up both on the side of the road, out of the car, screaming at each other, and then one of them threw something at the other person, and then the other person smashed the back windshield of the car, and there's a little kid in the back seat. The two-dimensional mind kicked in there. Then the body is communicating from its emotions. The nervous system is stressed to the max, and anything happens, somebody's got to be right, somebody's got to be wrong, and it explodes. That's why it's essential that there's some kind of daily practice to deal with the pressure. Otherwise, it's going to come out at some point, You can't just walk around saying you're okay or thinking positive thoughts. There has to be an experiential component. If there isn't an experiential component, you can listen to all the Oprah that you want, but eventually the pressure is going to come out. I listen to her podcast now. It's pretty good. There's good people on there. I heard one, Tony Robbins on there said, if you don't have 10 minutes to meditate every day, you don't have a life. Because people make excuses. 10 minutes, that's all it takes. But pay attention. See beneath the surface. You know the story of the Buddha when he was a young man? He was royal, like a prince. And you know what when he was born, like a, what do you call it? Like a fortune teller. I don't know if that's what I mean, but somebody who predicts what's going to happen. Like a pundit, that's a good word. But fortune teller makes me think of somebody at like the flea market with a crystal ball and like a pundit. Yeah, psychic, yeah. Vedic astrologer. You got the idea, right? Just visualizing some, like in the movie Big, you put the money in the machine and it tells you what's going to happen. Anyhow, they said, your son is either going to be a great king or a great spiritual teacher. And when the king heard that, very materialistic king, insecure, he said, I'm going to do everything I can to make sure that my son lives in the palace and only sees what living as a royal king is, so that he doesn't go the other way. So he saw only the solution, or tried to present only the solution. So he had everything he wanted, all the toys, all the best food, and he never left the palace. So what do you think he did, like all good kids do? Rebel. He snuck out. And you know what he saw when he snuck out? Poverty, sickness, death. And he was like, wait a second, this is all going on out here and I'm up in Disneyland up here? We got to figure this out. You know, because it's clear, it's our pain. You know. And then the story goes on from there. But it's a good way of, and we do it with our own children. Like I don't know, should I take my daughter on Hastings in Maine in Vancouver? But I take her there. I have to. I have a responsibility as a spiritual teacher. And when she says, Daddy, I keep her safe. I'm not crazy. I don't hand her to someone while I have lunch or something. But we walk so she can see it all. And she asks questions. And what do you think I tell her? These people are sick. They're not bad people. But you have to be careful. Because when people are sick, they do things they don't mean. That's a good, balanced teaching. Rather than, here we are, the safe people over here, and there they are, the bad people over there. It perpetuates duality. And in all the traditions, you see this teaching that says, the sage sits unaffected by duality. And when Krishna is teaching Arjuna about yoga, he says, the yogi sits able to control the body and the senses, unaffected by duality. The yogi is the same in praise and blame. In the Sikh tradition, there's a writing by Guru Gobind Singh called the Rayman Shabad, and he says, the sage sits and the universe is like the potter's wheel, like in Ghost. The clay comes off the potter's wheel in the direction of the sage, and angels and devils are going by, and the sage isn't affected by it. But it doesn't say that the sage pretends that the devils aren't there and the angels are. He sees all of it. But you have to have a good, strong, meditative mind to experience it. Otherwise, you start going over to only one. Us versus them. Draw a line in the sand. Die for the flag. All these old ways of thinking. Die for the cause? That's an old way of thinking. Now is the time to live for the cause. Practice, compassion, prosperity, creativity. All the things that remind you of who you are. If some belief system supports that, do that. If it doesn't, don't worry about it. There was a man who came to see Yogi Bhajan speak once, and he said at the end of the thing, he said, "Sir, I loved everything you said." And he shook his hand. He said, "There's only one problem. I'm an atheist." And he said, "Me too, Yogi Bhajan." And the guy looked confused and said, "You just talked about God for 2 hours. What do you mean you're an atheist?" He said, "I don't believe in any version of God that's been presented thus far either." And I thought, yeah, that is kind of what I believe. Right? It's just, there hasn't been any version of God that makes any sense, so there must not be a God. It's no different than believing in a God. It's just a belief system. It's a lampshade. And if you're a master, if you're a college student, then you should be able to discuss this with anybody without the need to be right. A good question about your spiritual practice is, do you want to be right or you want to be free? And here's another good question. If you know who you are, can you be offended? No. Only if you identify with the condition can you be offended. If you know that you were born with infinite worth, that you've had infinite worth this whole time, that you have infinite worth now, and that you always have infinite worth, is there anything I could say that would offend you? The only part of it the only part of you that it offends is you identifying with the condition. I'm a this and you're a that. Kind of interesting, huh? Now, let's be clear. It makes a ton of sense when you're talking about it, and then you go out of here and it's not that easy. You know? And you have to be mindful about how much you open the shutters. Because if you just blow the shutters open with some people, why are you so angry? Don't you know that you're infinite worth and you're not your condition? Somebody might punch you in the face. And then you have to deal with the condition. Or you're telling the checkout girl at the grocery store that she's this radiant being born of infinite worth throughout all time. They'll take you away. But you see it. You walk around and you see it. Or like Yogi Ji said, if you can't see God in all, you can't see God at all. It means you don't just see it in the things you like. You see the pain. You see when people behave a certain way because of their pain. And you even remember times where you acted a certain way because of your pain. You know, you've hurt people. We all have. That's what we do. We hurt people, especially when we identify with our conditions. You see? Infinite worth. You feel it. That's why everybody looks at the baby like, I remember that. Somewhere underneath all this crap. And the other part of our forgetting who we are got passed down through religion. And it's still even written in the text. Like if you study in university, I have a degree in religious studies. And so I studied all these things, looking for the common thread. And they even left in things like Jesus saying that you could do even greater things than me. They left that in there. And still people omit it. He doesn't say, if you try really hard and you do follow all the rules, someday you may be as good as me. It doesn't say that. It says better. Why do we have that idea? It didn't come from the teacher. It came from the marketing set up around the teacher. Oh, well, I've got some good ideas to keep people feeling guilty, giving some money, and then we can, it's marketing. It's the same thing that happens in marketing now. The one and only Coca-Cola, there's no substitute. It's water and sugar. It's marketing. Just look closely. Or look at the teachings of these great sages that we look up to. They're telling you the same thing over and over, who you are. And then you start, oh, but the marketing is so shiny, and my parents told me that we all have to believe in the marketing, and it's a powerful thing. When Ram Dass was a professor at Harvard, psychology professor, they would do these tests where they would show a long line and a short line, and there would be 6 people in the room, and 5 of them are in on it. But the poor sucker, who's the one, doesn't know. They think everybody's been invited for this focus group to be tested. And they say, point to the longer line. And everybody points to the short line. And like 70% of the time, the poor sucker goes along with what's happening because they don't want to be the one who's they're like, maybe something's wrong with me, even though it's blatantly obvious. It's a good test. Or they do another test where, you strike a match, and then you have another match there that you switch it with, and then you put the match on the person's skin, and some people get a heat bubble, and the match didn't even burn them. Do you understand? It was a cold match, but their mind perceived it was hot, and they get a mark. It's a powerful mind. And the word human, the word hue in English, what does it mean? H-U-E. Have you seen it before? It means light. And man comes from the word manas, which means what? Mind. When you're born with infinite worth, you have the light mind. You don't have to do anything. But as you start to get some intelligence, the mind is amazing. Like, we use so little of our brain, it's unbelievable. But if you can train your mind, give it some new neural patterns, think about that power of the mind we're talking about, if you can actually direct it, not be directed by it. You heard of Ashtanga Yoga before, like Patabi Joyce, Ashtanga Yoga? He would always yell at the students who were not doing what he asked them to, and he would say, "You're very bad." First of all, his English isn't good, so he would tell them they're bad. And then he would say, "You're not mind controlling. Your mind's controlling you. Very bad." We talked about this. Yoga is the ability to deal with the mind, to direct the mind. And if you learn to direct the mind, you improve the quality of life, not only for you, but for everybody. Because you're not walking around believing in Maya. You know what Maya is? The illusion of separateness. There is no separateness. It doesn't exist. This is what the yogis and the Buddha and all of these masters taught. Have you heard that word, Maya? Some people name their child that, but unbeknownst to the tradition that calls it the illusion of separateness. It's my child, the illusion of separateness. So who is the Buddha then, if it's not the one and only? A historical figure? No, it's you. The Christ, whatever you want to call it, the prophet, is not separate from you. There isn't any hierarchy. In hierarchy, there's duality. And the great teachers have said that the sage is beyond duality. Not, I'm the king of the castle, and you're the... And that even happened in yoga. And we've seen the resistance that came from that. Like the one great teacher and nobody will ever be as great as so-and-so. And then the teacher starts thinking that it's them doing the teaching, not the one coming through them like a conduit. And then what do? Exploit others. Oh, wow, look at me. Like Bikram, there's a problem with Bikram. It's not Bikram, it's his conditions. It could happen to anybody. If you don't do I'm not excusing his behavior, by the way. It could happen to anybody, though. If you start thinking it's you, look at music. Some people start thinking that they're better than everybody else, and then the quality of their art sort of goes away. But the ones who can humble themselves and just allow it to come through them, sometimes they make a great record. I like Neil Young. You think every Neil Young record is great? No, he did some weird stuff in the 80s. But he's always humble and being Neil Young, not trying to be something else. So you're called to be the masters of this time. Yogi Ji used to say that the planet Earth is like a one-room schoolhouse. You know what a one-room schoolhouse is? We don't have them so much anymore. Well, we kind of do, but in a different way. There's more people. But all the grades are in the same classroom. And no teacher. Do you remember what school was like when the teacher left the room? Everyone was just nice and behaving. No! Waiting for the teachers to show up. And your calling as one of these great masters is to be, you know how evolution works? If I want, say I have an acorn that's going to grow an oak tree, in order for this lineage of oak trees to survive, every acorn needs to be better than the previous batch. If it's weaker than the previous batch, what happens to the lineage? It dies. So if we have a lineage where we all try to be as good as the great so-and-so, but we're limited and told we'll never be as great as the great so-and-so, what happens to the lineage? It dies. You want the lineage to thrive and make change, then the students are meant to be the masters of tomorrow, which means the students are 10 times greater than the teacher. And a good teacher can see it. Not looking for followers. You know the problem with great leaders are? They make great followers. No? That's why in this tradition, you have to initiate yourself. I don't initiate you. My teacher didn't initiate me. His teacher didn't initiate him. If I told you all this stuff and said, try and do this meditation now, get up at this time, and then I had to come to all of your houses to make sure that you, like Santa Claus, and make sure that you got up and practiced? No. You see some truth to it, you do the exercise and it works, and you have to initiate yourself. Not for me, not for your friends, not for God, not for you. That's what a yogi does. We're just about finished with the chat, and then we'll do a meditation. So corruption, we'll talk a bit about corruption, is an internal affair. It's a mental act. It comes from inside you. Not you, but this, identifying with your conditions. If there's a war going on in here, it comes out. If there's hate going on in here, it comes out. You weren't born with that hate. This beautiful baby isn't born with that. No baby is. You learn it. From what? Your conditions. When I was 20 years old, I had a girlfriend who was Filipino, and her father, nice guy, great family, but somehow along the line told her that she should never trust a person with red hair. And it just never really came out that she had been told this. And then one day she sort of said something in passing. I thought, hold up for a sec. What was that? Oh, well, yeah, people with red hair are different than other people. I was like, are you listening to what you're saying right now? It came from conditions. It's crazy. And then you pass it on, and you pass it on, and you pass it on, and you pass it on. It's difficult to break that cycle. You know it's true. Like if you're married or something, you start to notice two things. One is your wife says they're never going to be like their mother. And two is that she's starting to act like her mother, but don't tell her. Because it's part of the line. But because of your infinite worth, you're not powerless to that, but you have to do something about the conditioning. Otherwise, if you don't do anything about the conditioning, it just carries on. Right? So there needs to be a clearing through meditation, a daily reminder of your infinite worth. And it needs to happen in two ways. You have to remind yourself, and then once you're clear, you go out and remind others. That's why consciousness is so important. To know who you are in relationship to your conditions. That's why it's the most important resource. If we all forget who we are, resistance is going to be so big, the teaching is going to be hard to manage. But what about, And this is why your consciousness must never be compromised or sold. Don't discount yourself. But everybody's got a story about. You know who Bruce Springsteen is? He's a great teacher. He said, "A story is a story. It's not a life." It's a good one. I've known people who've been living out the same story 40 years, not serving them, holding them back. Or you get around people who have a drinking problem and they don't realize it. What are their stories about? All the great things going on in their life? Or is it about this thing that happened 20 years ago when I was like this? And it's like, you guys are driving me nuts. Because of the story. And as long as you identify with your identity, no one can break you. You can't be exploited. This is why they started to teach that Kundalini Yoga was dangerous in India about 500 years ago, when Guru Nanak came along, because he was teaching this concept called Ekankar. You know what it means? There's only one. That's what it means. And he was saying, there's no Hindus, there's no Muslims, there's only one God. Choose how you understand it. It's called Satnam. Truth is its name, and you're that. And it started to catch on. And the British were in power. And what did the British do as their technique at the time? Divide and conquer. You can't have everybody believing that there's oneness. Where will the British be? So they find some weak links, give some money, put them in positions of power. Kundalini Yoga is dangerous because you won't be exploited by anybody. You start understanding this stuff and somebody says, get in line. Are you going to get in line? No. It depends. This yogi from Canada, she was originally from Austria. She started an ashram in BC. She's not in a body anymore, but it's called Yashodhara Ashram. It's a beautiful place. You can go and visit there. When she was a little girl, she had dreams of this bald Indian man, and she would tell her parents, and they're like living in Austria thinking, what in the world is this about? And she became a professional dancer, ballerina, and she got hurt. So she started to practice yoga. And then she was doing a little practice here and there, and she went to see some Swami who was visiting from India, and it was the bald guy from her dreams as a child. So she started hanging around with him. And he was a very good teacher to her. And there came a time in that tradition where there's an initiation. So she asked the teacher, would you be my teacher? And he said, I will if you do everything I say. It's pretty intense order. And you know what she said? I'll do everything you say as long as it doesn't compromise who I am. And he said, that's the best answer anyone's ever gave. That's the teaching right there. You pay attention to the things. Some of these things are techniques that you learn from a book or from, a meditation or from a teacher. And some of them are really negative and harsh things. They're all teaching you all the time. But you're learning to look at all of it through the lens of you. And the techniques that are guiding you to you, keep doing them. And the ones that are taking you from you, get rid of them. In the Tibetan Buddhist thought, they have these 3 areas of study, and they're listed in areas of importance, or explained by the Dalai Lama in 3 areas of importance. The most important thing is empirical experience. Do you know what empirical means? It means beyond theory or logic. That's the highest and most important. Like, you have an experience of something, you know it to be true, go with that. Even if it defies scripture, which is at the bottom. Empirical experience. You have an experience, you know something to be true, somebody says, well, you can't do it that way, it's not logical. I don't care, sorry. Self-knowledge. If there's a doubt, then you go into the second area, which is prove it wrong. And if you prove it wrong, get rid of it. Like the Buddha said, challenge everything I say. Test it. If it doesn't work, what good is it? Even if the scriptures say that it's going to work and it doesn't work, gone. The tricky thing in spirituality is, like, imagine in science if people started saying, like, well, Newton said it's true, so it's absolute law. We just do whatever Newton said. We don't do that in science. Right? And the Dalai Lama, he said it. If there are Buddhist practices that we do that science proved were false, guess what I would do, even as the Dalai Lama? I would stop. And then at the bottom is scripture. It's not get rid of scripture. Some of that scripture, when put to the test, will lead to empirical experience. You see how it kind of works? So your duty as somebody who's doing meditation practice, yoga practice, is to test it out and use your critical mind. Oh yeah, this worked. Oh, this really connects me to the best version of me. Because there are some yogic practices that are taking people away from the best version of you. I do spiritual counseling constantly with young women who start to get eating disorders from yoga practice. Oh, but I thought if I just did the poses for 5 hours a day and only drank green juice, it was healthy. No, it's not. Is it leading you to the best version of you? Well, I have a lot of neuroses and issues about how my body looks. Then it's not. You know? But I thought. So there isn't actually any right or wrong in duality. It's paying close attention to what is serving the best version of you. That's a yoga practice. It's good to, the rules are not there just because they're rules. Bob Dylan, he said, if you want to live outside the law, you have to be honest. It's a good teaching. The tricky part is being honest with yourself. But if you have security, you know who you are, you'll know when things don't align. It's like, yeah, it doesn't work for me. But the tricky part is sometimes you go like, oh, no, it doesn't work for me, but you know it does, you just don't want to do it. Yeah, getting up early and doing my meditation and taking a cold shower, it doesn't work for me, so I think I'll just sleep till 10 every day and just do whatever I want. But I know if I do that, I'm sort of dull and I can't really show up for the students and, you know. But some days, that's what I want to do. You know the word guru? What does it mean? Teacher? Gu means darkness, Ru means light. So the guru is moving you from darkness to light. But it's not always a person. I think about it as a principle. Like a principle that is always there, constantly available to guide you from darkness to light. Even the resistance, we said, even the misstep is the guru. It's always there. And your duty, your job, to identify. You want to live according to your purpose, according to your dharma. You have to learn to watch and see. If you can't see God in all, you can't see God at all. It's always there. It's like energy management. You watch how much mental real estate the practices you're doing are taking up in your life. Like coffee. Is coffee right or wrong for a yogi? You hear all this. Well, how much mental real estate does it have? Some people say, I could take it or leave it, or I just have a cup in the morning, it's no big deal. Then there's other people inside their mind, this is going on. Well, I only have a cup, but then I had like 2 cups in the afternoon, and I said that I wasn't going to have 2 cups, so maybe I should stop drinking coffee, so I'm going to maybe have this alternative, and then if I'm doing it's like, it's not good for you, man. You see how much space it's occupying? It's taking up all the space. You know? So you start to pay attention less about, right or wrong and the duality of it. You just pay attention to how much mental real estate is this occupying. And then when there's space, the practice will allow you to see you. And if there isn't space, then you see this busy mind. And meditation will help you unpack that. You have to learn to listen. According to the sage Patanjali, he said, concentration is the gateway to meditation. If you can't concentrate, which is really hard in this time, how can you meditate? That's why people say, how do we start the talk? I can't meditate, my mind's too busy. The real reason they're saying that is they can't concentrate. And you see it, it's rampant in schools, it's rampant in relationships. You become a master of this, you become a master of communication. What does a master of communication do best? Listen. Right? You have to be trained to do that. For the most part, Some people are really blessed and they get this great listener born into the family. But generally, everybody wants to be right and somebody else has to be wrong. And so we'll do a little meditation tonight. It's a very simple, maybe we'll do, we got half an hour. Maybe we'll do one that's a little more challenging and then one that's a little easier. So you can see the challenge and the solution at the same time. There are many forms of meditation. Because you have to learn to concentrate first. That's how it operates. To think that you would just tell a student, just sit there and don't think about anything, it won't work. And actually, it isn't not thinking about anything. It's listening. Because sometimes, amidst all the bullshit, there's this little great thing. Like, oh, you should tell so-and-so to do this meditation. That's a great idea. Where did that come from? And I'll tell you, if I didn't sit and meditate, it wouldn't have come up. A bunch of other nonsense would have come up. So it works for me, but it's not the only way. And over time, you start to expand your awareness beyond the conditions. You start to experience who you are in relationship to all of this. And I think the greatest gift of meditation that comes out of that, it's almost like things slow down a little bit, even though time's going the same speed. Right? Like, how do most people communicate? I know you say words, but think more than that. From their emotions. That's how most people communicate. Like these stories about road rage and all that stuff. It's a common thing to communicate from your emotions. And if you communicate from your emotions, what are you more prone to do? React. And then if you react to a reaction, then you're really in trouble. And that's where a lot of blame and all of this stuff comes from. communicating from emotions, not dealing with the nervous system. The nervous system is fried, right? It has two components. One that needs to be engaged and fired up, and one that needs to, in order for it to kick in, you need to relax. They go together. Isn't that how your day is? Like half the day you got to engage and half the day you got to relax. And if you don't do that, it creates imbalance. And if you keep reacting and from an emotional place, you're always in some conundrum. You know? Yogi Bhajan had back in the day at a men's camp for 2.5 hours, and none of the wives or partners were there. He had the men chant, "I will not take the bait," for 2.5 hours. That was the teaching. It's not a gender thing, whatever you identify as. It's not about what genitals you were born with. It's how you identify. We are all masculine and feminine. Actually, even beyond that, a lot of our problems is the inability to balance the two. In you. The divine masculine and the sacred feminine is in everybody. It's not, somebody isn't born with all of one. It's like being born with all the challenge or all the solution. We all have all of it. We are all of this. There's only one. And enjoy your lampshade and celebrate it, but it's not you. It's part of your experience. Yeah? Okay, so let's do a meditation that is to bring the consciousness up. So what you're going to do is sit straight and then hold your elbows above your head like this. And keep your eyes 1/10 open. And you're going to notice when you do this